healed on the Sabbath, the synagogue leaders said to the people, "There are 6 days for work, so come and be healed on those days, not on the Sabbath." The Lord answered them, "You hypocrites! Doesn't each of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or donkey from the stall and lead it out to give it water? Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her?" When he said this, all of his opponents were humiliated, but the people were delighted with all the wonderful things he was doing. I never knew this part.
Word of the Lord.
The word of the Lord. I'll remember one day.
Let us pray. Ever living God, as I speak, may you increase and I decrease. May the words you have given me for this message be seed which rest upon our hearts, that we might bear fruit for you here on earth. May I be bold and courageous in speaking what it is you've given me to speak. And may we, as your people, have ears that hear. This is our prayer in the name of Jesus the Christ. Amen. Amen. Now, I may have told you all about my friend Hud. He's a deputy sheriff. He's actually an investigator now, and he is the epitome of the word gung-ho. When he wears that badge 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and he's always got his badge on him, he's always got his gun, and Hud's ready. If I'm going into a fight, Hud's going before me, because there won't be any fight left. I won't have to do anything. Hud and I share a hobby together. We love archery. So, in Amarillo, Texas, it's against the law to shoot archery in your backyard. So, one day Hud and I were shooting archery in my backyard. He's a deputy sheriff of Potter County. And I said, "What do you think about this, Hud? Do you know that it's illegal to do that?" And you know what he said to me? It took me so far out, I couldn't believe it came out of his mouth. He says, "Barry, it's only illegal if you get caught." I kind of looked at him like, "Excuse me?" I said, "Look at you. You got your badge and your gun on. You represent Potter County, and you just told me it's only illegal if I get caught?" Is that how we live our lives? Is that how we live our lives according to the law of God? I mean, we have a story today where Jesus apparently acts against the law of God. Let's frame that. He's in the synagogue. The 4th commandment says, "Honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy." The 1st commandment says, "Worship the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me." Jesus is in the synagogue on the Sabbath. I'd say he's keeping the law, wouldn't you? He's keeping the law. The woman who Jesus calls forth is also keeping the law. The synagogue leader is also keeping the law. But yet we have a whole story here for 7 verses that's about a misinterpretation of what the law is and how it's applied into our lives. And I think we as people of God sometimes need to sit back and reflect on how the law fits in our life and what the law really is in our lives. Because if we don't follow the law, then we're given a false witness. And we don't want to give a false witness, but we want to live into the law. Jesus didn't say he came to abolish the law. He said he came to fulfill the law. And so our story today takes us to that. And I love it because he's in the synagogue and he's worshiping. And somebody calls him out because of something he does in worship. Now, from my side of the pew, that's nothing new, okay? But maybe from your side of the pew, it might be something new. But we, in our leadership role, we get called out all the time because people don't think we follow the rules accordingly. So I understand. The ruler of the synagogue is doing his job. He holds Jesus accountable. He said, wait a minute. Don't you know the fourth commandment? The fourth commandment says, honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. You're not supposed to do any work on the Sabbath. Now, do you know why it's like that? The law was established after Israel had been released from Egypt. And Israel was of the mindset as slaves. And do you know how many hours a week a slave works? As many hours as the master wants them to. There are no days off. 24/7, that slave was at the master's beck and call. And so Israel had the mindset that every day we worked. I mean, for 40 years they were held captive. And for that long, they were pressured to work every day. And they didn't take time to spend with God. And so God established some commandments for them to follow to get them back on track in relationship with God. The Ten Commandments really aren't a checklist. They're a portrait of what a relationship with God and with one another looks like and what it should look like. It's not something to hold us accountable. It's something for us to live into and to become a part of the portrait, become a part of the painting. And so, while Israel is struggling to understand how the law fits and make sure the law fits, and they've established a ruler in the synagogue that's going to hold people accountable. So, technically, he's not wrong. He's really not wrong when he chastises Jesus. How many of us thought he was wrong when we read the story? And we said, good Lord. Because it says that he was indignant, right? Because he had the law behind him. He knew what the stone said, what was supposed to happen in number 4, is that we keep this day holy. We don't work on this day. And Israel has a mindset of working all the time. How many of us are like that? How many of us always keep a Sabbath day holy? Now, those of us who are Christian, we claim the first day of the week as our holy day because that's the day when Jesus rose from the dead. That's why we keep it holy. But do we work on our holy day? I mean, there's probably some people who aren't in the pews today because they're out working. I'm not naming any names, but I'm just saying that, it happens. There's people who don't go to church because Sunday's another day they can make more money. And what's happened to keeping a relationship with God? I mean, if we don't put ourselves in front of God, how can we have a relationship with God? We get so caught up in our own lives that we forget to take holy time. One of my favorite pastors in the world, Herb Linsky, would always post something called Sabbath Eve. And it was directed at those of us who lead the church. And he wanted to make sure we took holy time on Sabbath Eve. Because really on Sunday, it's not our Sabbath. Our Sabbath occurs Friday or Saturdays or Mondays when we can get away. I mean, we worship, but to be quiet and away from people and spend the day honoring God, it usually doesn't happen because we're working on Sundays. But he would write in Sabbath Eve guides for us as pastors to enrich us so that we would be ready for Sunday morning. It's important in our lives to take time to be in relationship with God. To take time and honor the Sabbath. The ruler of the synagogue was not wrong. His attitude may have been wrong. But what he was saying was correct. Do not work on this day. But he forgot who he was dealing with. You remember who he was dealing with? Y'all remember who he was dealing with? He was dealing with Jesus. The one who was crucified, buried, and in 3 days rose again. And now sits at the right hand of the Father. The one who we call Savior. A lot of people say his last name is Christ. He's Messiah. He's our bridge to a relationship with God. And the ruler didn't know who he was. And so what he did was he gracefully taught that ruler and everybody in that place a new understanding of the law. And this is what he did. What got him in trouble was they said he worked on the Sabbath. And his rebuttal to the ruler of the synagogue was, seriously? How many of you care for the ones you love before you come to the synagogue? How many of you care for your livestock before you come to the synagogue? How many of you do your daily chores before you come to the synagogue? I mean, the animals have to eat, the kids got to be fed, right? So we work. But what we work at is a work of love. Because when Jesus was pressed by the attorney to know what the greatest commandment was, he said, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is the greatest, the first, to love your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus knows the law, and he's here to fulfill the law. And so when he's pressured by the ruler of the synagogue because he healed a woman in the synagogue on a holy day, he says that the true fullness of the deal of the law is to honor God by loving one another. What greater day or what greater place than to honor God by healing somebody than in the synagogue? What greater place is that than we come to this place to encounter God? And I hope you expect to leave here different. If you don't expect to leave from this place different and having encountered the Holy One, you need to check why you're here. Because God is with us and there's nothing greater God wants to do than to move in our lives. And that brings me to the most important part of the story. You see, as Jesus was living into the fullness of the law and showing them, teaching them, caring for people is part of the law. The best thing we can do on the Sabbath day is care for one another. The best thing we can do is honor one another because each and every one of us are created by God. We are created by God. The psalmist writes in Psalm 139, he says, "For you knit me in my mother's womb, and you know my innermost being." Think about that word. You knit me, you put me together. You created me uniquely in my mother's womb, and you know, hear this, you know my innermost being. Can you imagine what her innermost being was? I have so much respect for her. 18 years. Now, we don't know if she was 70 or if she was 18. But we do know this about her. Somewhere in her life, she became physically incapacitated to stand up straight. She had a burden, a physical burden. Not that it was bad, not that she was bad, but she had a physical burden. 18 years she carried that. 18 years she came to the synagogue. 18 years knowing that God knew her innermost being, she presented herself before God. How many of us do that? How many of us are willing to say, God, this is my innermost being that you knitted together in my mother's womb, as ugly as it is, and here I am. You see, because here's what society said to that woman. You know where she sat probably in the synagogue? Oh, back there in the very background, the very fringes. Because she was a woman, number one. And in Jesus' time, I'm sorry, ladies, you had no value. It was wrong. You had no value. You were there to take care of the men and produce children. And number two, she was physically incapacitated. And so they looked at her almost as if she were unclean. Because they didn't know if it was the sins of the mother and the father that did that, or if she just had some kind of disease. They just didn't know. And I promise you, people walked a wide circle around her. When she would walk in the synagogue, people would walk around her. And she spent 18 years of her life bent over. Can you imagine what the view of the world must have been for her for 18 years? I'm going to say some of you can. A lot of us can. Because we walk around in this world and we might as well be bent over. Because we have a part of ourselves that we're never going to admit to anybody else, much less to Jesus who we are. We think we can hide our innermost being from God. We can take all those dark secrets that happen when nobody's looking, all those thoughts we have when nobody can hear us, all the way we treat people when we're outside this building, everything we do to discredit who God is in this world because of our selfish actions, we might as well be bent over. Because we're not walking in faith. Because if we're not people who understand who God is, if we don't understand that God knit us in our mother's womb, and God knows our very innermost being, and there's nothing more in our lives that God wants to do than to call us out. That's what Jesus was for. Jesus was there so that we could have a path to God, and we could be called out, and our sins could be forgiven, and we could be healed. The woman presented herself in the church that day so that she could be called out. Jesus was there. She didn't go looking for Jesus. Jesus called her out. Lady, hey, you back there in the back corner, you want to come to the front? On this day, you have been healed. You know how many times she'd been in the synagogue? I don't know if it was her first or she'd been there for 18 years, but I'm going to tell you, on that day, it was worth being there. On that day, she understood that God loved her. On that day, God fulfilled the law in her. God said, you are mine, you are beautiful, I created you in your mother's womb, I know your innermost being. And Jesus fulfilled the law because what did he do? He loved others on the Sabbath day. He came to fulfill the law, not abolish the law. And he called her out of where she was. How many of us are willing to listen to the Holy Spirit when Jesus is calling out of us out of where we are? How many of us are willing to admit who we are? She had to walk in front of that whole crowd and show the whole crowd who she was as she came to see Jesus. Can you imagine what was going on in the pews or the chairs or whatever they were in? Look at that. Can you see her? She's going up to Jesus. I mean, the gossip lines had to be going, right? And he called her the least in the whole crowd. He called her to the front. So if you think you're not important enough for God, you're wrong. Because he called her out. Come, most beautiful one. Yeah, you. Come. And she was going, me? Do you mean me? Yes, you. Whatever your burden is, whatever it is you're hiding from God, whatever it is got you so tied up you can't love anybody else but yourself, God's calling you out. He's calling you by name and he's saying, would you want to come? You want to come sit with me? And it's not something that's going to be harsh. What did Jesus do? He didn't beat her up. He didn't call her names. He didn't pronounce her bad. He did what Jesus does. He elevated her. He elevated her to a position of beauty, to a position of equality. He brought her to the front of the synagogue and he said, on this day, you are free. You are free from whatever it is that binds you. You are free from whatever ties you up in your life. From your anxiety, from your worry, from your control, from your anger, from your lust. Whatever it is, you are free from that if you'll just come to me. That's our decision. That day in my backyard, my deputy sheriff friend Hud and I had a decision. When I told him it was illegal, and he said it doesn't matter if it's illegal, only if you get caught, we had to decide if we were going to continue to shoot. We continued to shoot. When Jesus calls us out of where we are, you have a decision to make. You going to come? He's waiting on you. There's nothing more that God wants for you to know than what a beautiful person of God you are. Nothing means anything else in the world except for you to realize that God knit you in your mother's womb. He knows your innermost being, and you are enough to call yourself a child of God. And if there's anything in your life that has you bent over, that's weighing you down, that you can't get control of, that keeps you from loving others as you love yourself, you need to come to Jesus. And you need to come to Jesus right now. And you need to know that Jesus is calling out to you, because that woman, what did she do? She got up in her crippled way and she walked however far it took her to get to the Savior. And he said to her, "This day you are free." This day, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. This day, you are free. Now, folks, when we encounter the Christ, we have a decision to make. Because God's going to set us free. I can promise you God's going to set us free. I can tell you stories upon stories of people who have been set free. But what those people did when Jesus said, "You are free," what that woman did when Jesus said, "You are free," is what we as all people of God should do. She stood straight up. Can you imagine? 18 years bound. 18 years pulled down. 18 years looked upon by everybody else in society that you're something different, or you must have done something wrong. You see people in our society, how they treat people who are physically handicapped or mentally handicapped or whatever they are. They walk a circle around them. And they give them space because they're afraid of the encounter. God's not afraid of the encounter. And 18 years, when he said she was free, she believed she was free, and she stood straight up. Folks, we need to stand straight up. God didn't create us to be cowards. God created us to be fearless, to walk through the world believing that Jesus is the Christ, and to bear witness in his name by loving others as God has loved us. Stand straight up. Whatever it is that's binding you or holding you down, bring it to Jesus, and Jesus will heal you, and you'll be able to stand straight up. The ruler was humiliated, as he should have been. But the people loved what Jesus was doing, and it began to catch fire. 19 years later, Jesus is still calling us to the front. And he's asking us to stand up. And he's telling us we are free from anything that keeps us from being holy. Let us live in our holiness. Let us accept Christ's offer. And let us do what she did. Let's stand